Well, greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to Truthseekers. Tonight is another of our special events in our new series, Revisiting Roswell. I selfishly thought that I could use the show here as a passport to talk to some of the world's greatest experts on the Roswell event. So far, we've heard from Cal Korff, we've heard from Dr. Kevin Randall, and Walter Bosley, each with their own perspective and beliefs and research about just what might have crashed in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. Um, the two other people that I really wanted to talk to, I'm happy to say that tonight we have Mr. Tom Carey, and coming up we'll have also his writing partner, Mr. Don Schmidt, on a future event here. Without further ado, I want to bring in tonight's very special guest. He's one of my favorite authors. You guys have heard me mention these two books that he wrote with Mr. Schmidt, called Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell, among others. But those are two of my favorite books on the event. So let's welcome him in here. There you go, Mr. Tom Carey. Good to see you.
Good evening, Stevie. It's nice to be with you this evening.
I can't tell you how happy I am having read a bunch of your books and listened to so many of your interviews that I get to have you on my show. It's a dream come true for me. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, first of all.
Well, I hope I don't disappoint.
No,
always happy to talk about Roswell.
I don't think that's possible. So listen, people are hotly debating everything in the live chat already. One of the things in our series here that a lot of people had a problem with, including me, was Mr. Cal Korff. He wrote the book The Truth About Roswell, and he claims it was just a mogul balloon and all these stories were embellished or made up. I have a real problem with his assertion of that, mostly because I've read your two books, especially Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell. I want you to talk about some of the firsthand witnesses that you spoke with, and whether or not they were that you believe that they were telling you the truth or making up stories, as some people believe.
Well, Stephen, Don Schmidt and I have interviewed over 600 first and second-hand witnesses to Roswell, and I can tell you as a fact that most or all of the first-hand witnesses are gone now, and we're only left with second and third-hand witnesses, mostly children and grandchildren. So it's to pick out the best witnesses. It's the way we look at it is that each witness is a little piece of the puzzle. Some are bigger pieces and others are smaller pieces, but nevertheless they all fit into the puzzle to make a picture. And with 600 first and second hand witnesses, we believe that we have the picture complete, or nearly 99% complete. The only thing, the only piece that we're missing is an incontrovertible piece of physical evidence. And that's the only thing that's missing. Otherwise, we do have the story. Some of the most notable witnesses that we interviewed, I would say certainly Mac Brazel's son, the rancher's son, Bill Brazel, had a lot to tell us. Edwin Easley, the base provost marshal, was a key witness, and that was interviewed. He was interviewed by Kevin Randall before I actually became an official part of the team, along about 1991. And the thing about Edwin Easley, Major Edwin Easley, was that he was interviewed by Randall at a time when they were still wondering if they were really on the right track of investigating Roswell as a UFO event and not not something else. And Randall interviews Easley over the phone, and to every one of Kevin's questions, Easley answers, I can't answer that. I'm sworn to secrecy. I'm sworn to secrecy. So every question, myself, I would have given up at that point.
Yeah.
But Kevin, to his credit, everlasting credit, he says, he asks Easley, he says, well, Major Easley, I guess he's retired. He's retired as a lieutenant colonel. Doesn't matter. But he says, well, can you tell us if we're on the right track or not? And Easley pauses for a second and he says, what do you mean by that? And Kevin says, well, that we're investigating a UFO crash from 1947. So there's a long pause, and Easley says, well, let me say this, you're not going on the wrong track.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that at that point in time in the investigation, that was absolutely critical. You have a fellow who was on the base. He was the head of the MP unit there, and he was at all the crash sites. There were 3 of them involved, and he was the head. He was the provost marshal, head of the MP unit on the base, and so all of his charges were the ones that cordoned off the area, surrounded the crash area, and kept people away from it. So he was right there. And one other incident involving Easley was when he was on his deathbed. I think that's about 1992. And he's being interviewed by, I guess, Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt. I'm guessing both were there. I'm not sure. In Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. That's where President Kennedy was taken after he was assassinated. When he was shot, they removed him to Parkland Hospital. So
it's going to be breaking up.
Huh?
I'm sorry. No, it's okay. You're back now. You were kind of breaking up there for a moment.
Oh, was I? So
let me try.
Easley's on his deathbed, and Randall and Schmidt had just published a book called The Truth about the UFO crash at Roswell. And this is well, no, I guess they hadn't at that time. If this is 1992, they still had the first book that they had written together called UFO Crash at Roswell, a huge bestseller. And so Easley's granddaughter comes in with the copy of UFO Crash at Roswell. She holds it up to the major. He's sitting up in his hospital bed, and he holds it up, the cover of the book, and he goes, "Oh, the creatures. So he's talking about the bodies.
Yeah.
So coming from Edwin Easley, you have the crash was UFO, and there were bodies. So he is a key witness, at least in my humble opinion. He was a key witness. And there were others. Walter Hout, the base public information officer, finally told everything that he knew in a sealed statement after he passed away in 2005. Let's see, Mac Brazel was already gone. General Roger Ramey was already gone. He
Some
died.
Of these people just say that these witnesses.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just reiterating that some of these people that wanted to tack onto the story. It doesn't make any sense to me that somebody would be on their deathbed and suddenly start talking about aliens.
Well, Stephen, I can't answer for the critics. I don't think if you're just sitting back in your living room in an easy chair and reading things, you don't have a sense from speaking with the actual witnesses. And if you interview enough of them, you get a sense of what is true and what is not true. And that only comes with experience. So I don't know what
Yeah, and your sense was that they were all being very truthful, right? I mean, you wouldn't include them in a book and talk about them for years in their testimony if you thought they were just embellishing or making up stories, fantastical stories.
right. We do mention a few what would you call them, disinformation people or
Certainly,
hoaxers.
yeah.
We do mention a few of them in our books, most notably a fellow by the name of Frank Kaufman, who
Sure.
really spun us some stories about being right in the eye of the hurricane. It was all, even the hardest witnesses to break and tell and determine that they're not telling the truth are those who were on the scene pretty near the time, so they know the lay of the land and they just plug themselves into the story. And two come to mind right away. One is Frank Kaufman, who was a personnel clerk. He was a sergeant. He was a personnel clerk on the base at the time. And he knew pretty much everybody on the base, so he could speak with offhand experience. Oh, yeah, I knew Marcel. I knew this guy. I knew that guy. I know where that's at. And you say, oh, my God, this guy, he knows everything. Well, it took us a while, but we finally came to the conclusion he was full of it, that he was spinning a tale. He put himself into it. He never came across to me as an officer, but he said he was like a high officer. And I was in the Air Force, and I know an enlisted person from an officer, and he was
Sure.
not an officer. So,
Yeah, sometimes you can definitely tell the difference between a
yes,
guy who was a grunt and a guy who was an officer just by their mannerisms and things like that. I remember my father was in the Navy, and one time we were at some barbecue or something, and some guy was telling stories about being like a captain of a ship, and my dad was like, "There's no way on God's green earth that guy was a captain.
yeah,
He was
you
a
can you can
enlisted man."
you can
Sure.
tell. You can tell. The other thing he said was the one crash site that even the Air Force agreed that was the crash site, the so-called debris field site on the Foster Ranch. Even the Air Force agreed that was the site, or the main site. Well, Kaufman said, well, that was a salted site, meaning one that was artificial. People went there and they threw things on the ground, to metal pieces, to make it appear that that was a crash site. And we're thinking, what is this guy talking about? Uh, we've got witnesses that tell us that this is the site, and even the Air Force agrees that it was, and he's trying to tell us it was a phony site. And so it just from that point on, we finally said, what was he talking about? And on his deathbed, he died of bone cancer. Don Schmidt and I went to him and said, Frank, why did you do it? Why did you do it? Tell all of these tales. He said, well, I didn't mean for it to go this far, but it got out of control. So I guess he meant that he was going to tell a little fib, and then it mushroomed and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he had TV cameras knocking on his door. His name was known all over the place. They were offering him many dollars to be interviewed, and it just got out of control. And he also, the third thing was he took us to what he said was the so-called impact site, where the final part of the ship came to rest. And he said this is was on the Hub Corn Ranch, and we had the TV cameras there and everything. And even Phil Klass, the great
Debunker,
Yeah,
yeah.
even he went there with us, and we're saying, wait a minute, there's no way you can get a fire truck in here because supposedly all these fire trucks came, and this thing was so in a rugged terrain. There's no way you could get fire trucks in there. This was a load. So plus
It
we
must
had
have been it must have been really disappointing for you to first think you had this expert witness that was plugged in and knew everything about the event because
well,
he was
uh,
there at the time, and you checked his background and went, well, this seems like a good witness, right? But it must have been disappointing for you.
well, it was disappointing uh, to the case because we got look at this this case, look, we got we got a hoaxer here. They're all hoaxers, that's what happens. It wasn't it was disappointing that when we realized that he was lying, why are you feel that you have to lie? But he doesn't change the case any. I mean, take him out of the case, we still have the case.
Yeah, you still
But
have
it was
600 other witnesses, right? So one's
yeah,
bad. That's
yeah,
sort of like I've heard a lot of debunkers and negative people mention him and say, like, see, that guy lied. They all lied.
that's
Well, you've
right.
got one out of 600. And it's like that old saying, one rotten apple doesn't spoil the basket,
That's right. The naysayers like to say, "Oh my goodness, look at this guy. There's a hoaxer. They're all hoaxers." And I've heard that so many times. What can you say? So instead of 600 witnesses, we have 599. Okay, so
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't really discount the rest of it.
right.
And then I wanted to also just dive into this Children of Roswell book, because again, back to this point that I'm trying to make, when people say that people just made this stuff up, I have a real problem with that because, like, I don't know about other people's parents, but my parents, especially when they were near death, wouldn't just start making up stories about alien bodies and stuff. You know what I mean? It seems just so ridiculous that somebody while near death would start telling their children these stories about alien bodies and things like that. So I found that a lot of the testimony in that book to be very compelling, because whose parents would just start talking about alien bodies right before they
Right.
died, or even the ones that told their children earlier in life, like
Yeah.
you don't tell your children these fake stories. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I'll tell you something, Stephen. This doesn't have to do with UFOs, but when I was a little kid, my father told me these two stories. He was from Boston, and he was born in 1901. So back in those days, not everybody had an automobile. People were still using horse-drawn carts and carriages. They were still using them. And he told me a story of being out in, I guess you would call it a buckboard, horse-drawn flatbed, something like that. And he
Hmm.
said it started raining frogs, little frogs. And I'm thinking, what? It's raining frogs. He says, yes. And he says, the thing that I remember about it were the wagon wheels running over crushing their little bodies in this storm, crushing these uh, I guess, baby frogs or whatever they were, the wagon wheels running over and crushing their little bones. He said that's the thing he remembered about it. And I'm thinking, wow, I've never heard of that. And he said there was one. He said there was one other thing. He said when he was a teenager, he was out in a rowboat with, I guess, his parents or something out in one of the, Boston is near the ocean, and then they were out in the bay, I guess. And he said this huge, he called it a sea serpent, but he said it was like a large snake with a head that looked like a horse, just slithered by the boats. I said, how big was it? He said, oh, it was huge. It was around, huge body, but it just went like right by the boat, and it was like a snake, but had a horse head type head. I'm thinking, wow, I don't know what he's telling me here, but this doesn't I can't, I'm only like 8, 9 years old and hearing this, and I think, I've never heard of this. Well, guess what? On some of the, I don't know, the Science Channel, History Channel, one of the cable channels, they do report that there are rainstorms or such squalls where little animals come down, and one of the types of animals that they cited was the little frogs, and this was on one of the cable channels.
Yeah, I know that can happen during hurricanes or something like that. Yeah, or like
Yeah, it's like
final events. Yeah,
it's like some sort of squall, and I don't understand the mechanics of it or the
yeah,
atmospheric.
that's an odd occurrence for sure.
But it's been reported, and also they on one of the shows they talked about a sea monster in I don't know, Narragansett Bay or something like that up there in the Boston area, and they drew a picture of it, and it was just exactly what my father was telling me. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, and I said, then I thought to myself, my father wouldn't lie to me. He never lied to me. So I just passed that on as far as parents telling
Sure.
their children things like that. Especially when they're small, they wouldn't lie to them like that, because when you're older, you can tell, oh, dad's spinning another one here. But
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you're a little kid, you don't lie to your children.
And one of the other things that I wanted to get into, because you took an awful lot of flack for it, is that, you're well aware that so many people have tacked on hoaxes onto the Roswell event. We've had alien autopsy, the Roswell rock, and of course the Roswell slides. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't.
Now you're striking home.
Yeah, but listen, I have tremendous respect for you and the way that both you and Mr. Schmidt handled it. I talked to him about this previously. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you some questions about that. And
Yes.
and one of the things I wanted to ask is when you first heard about these Roswell slides, and for those that don't know, they reported to be slides of an alien from the Roswell event, or that's what they were hyped as. Did you think that you had the smoking gun, that you were finally going
Yes.
to get that smoking gun,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so this must have been even more disappointing than Frank Kaufman, right?
I was in disbelief, Stephen. We analyzed them as best we could for 3 years, and doing due diligence on them, and we went as far as we could with them, and everything pointed to that it was a slide of one of the Roswell bodies, because the slide stock, the film itself was from 1947, according to the coding. And all of the other pictures in this collection that were shown to us were from the 1940s.
Yeah, so it had to be tantalizing, right? You thought you
Yes,
had it. You thought you
everything,
finally
everything,
got the proof.
everything else was from the 1940s. The little code on the slide, the side of the slide, without going all into it, it was from 1947, and this body on the slide looked exactly like I envisioned the Roswell bodies looked. It looked exactly like that, and
Sure.
everything pointed to this is one of the Roswell bodies. Now, the kicker here was at the foot of this body in the slide was a placard. It was a oblong placard with writing on it. For 3 years we sent it out. We tried nobody could read that writing, which would obviously have told us what was lying there on the slab, because it would have said, okay, this is so and so and so and so. We tried for 3 years. We sent it out to various places, even the Army photo interpretation unit. They couldn't break this cursive writing. So I figured, well, that's it. We can't go any further with this. Everything pointed to this is a Roswell cadaver. Well, no sooner did we have this big affair in Mexico City when a day or two later, here comes the slide. Somebody has cracked the writing. I'm thinking, oh my God, how can that be? We tried for 3 years and couldn't do it. Here comes somebody that where it shows it's the mummified body of a, I don't know, 6-year-old or 9-year-old boy.
Yeah.
I said, this
I
can't be.
remember this, and I was so disappointed. But then I had my own suspicions because Jaime Maussan was involved. And Jaime Maussan, for those that don't know, was sort of like, he had this marmoset monkey for a while. He was saying was an alien, and he was involved in. Yeah.
Jaime had nothing to do with the analysis. He just provided the venue.
Sure, but just because he was involved and he was hyping it, I thought this may be a hoax because of his involvement. So I was cautiously hopeful that this was real. But I remember, how fast that this thing fell apart. They did this big pay-per-view event, right?
I thought I was dreaming. I thought I was dreaming. I said, this can't be true, because we did everything we could for 3 years to break this, and we couldn't. And here, especially when somebody, and they're right there on the foot of the body, is this mummified body of a 6-year-old or 9-year-old boy. I don't know, forget how old it was. And I'm thinking that's got to be a hoax, because we tried for 3 years. How can somebody in 2 days come up with break it?
Yeah, but apparently they had much cleaner scans or higher resolution scans.
They had a different slide, because I only saw one slide. Apparently there were more, and somehow this, I don't know who it was, got a hold of one of the other slides where someone, and I suspect who it was now, scrambled the letters to where they couldn't be, that you couldn't break them. And so we didn't know, I didn't know that there was another slide that you could unscramble the letters, because the only slide we had was this one. And I was in disbelief, but that's what happened. That's what happened. My own looking back on it now, I was captivated by what I was seeing, plus the fact that it was a 1947 photos from 1947 Kodak photo stock.
Yeah, so in other words, the film dated correctly to what was purported to be on the slide. And yes, it made sense. Like, okay, so this film stock that this slide was from is from 1947. So that's pretty tantalizing and convincing evidence that it just may be from the Roswell event.
Plus the body,
the years matched up.
The body looked exactly like I expected it to look.
Yeah.
And that just, that overtook me, because I could, looking at 1947 stock, and we went to Kodak, the fella at Kodak who was the expert on slide stock back in the 40s. He said, no, there's this is okay. There's this, I don't see any shenanigans going on here. So that was it. And so we went public with that. Within 2 days, somebody says, this is a mummified body of a boy, let's say
2 years old. Yeah.
2 years old. And I did not believe that until I actually saw, we had another fella who we've been working with, and he went online and he found that body when it was still, as they say, in situ. It was still in at the site when they discovered it, and it was the same body. So at that point, when I saw when the body, when it was still being excavated, it had the same little thing around its neck. It had the same look on its face. But the thing that was different about it, Stephen, was that, when you're at the site, it looks all dried out. A mummified body looks all dried out. Yes. And but you can see in the picture they cleaned it up somehow and made it look like it wasn't a mummy, because I've seen mummies before. And
Yeah, I'm sorry, friends. I'm
they all
having
look,
some technical issues. I was trying to share the pictures of the slides. Anybody can Google the Roswell slides, and you'll
yeah,
see pictures of this body. And you
because
have to admit, if you look at the
I
pictures, this looks like a typical what you would think a Roswell alien looked like after seeing
yeah.
all these drawings and witness
Because
descriptions over the years and things like that. Yeah,
I've seen mummified bodies, and they all look shriveled up and desiccated, dried out. This thing didn't look dried out. It looked like it had been alive not too long before. That's what it looked like to me. So everything
sure.
fell in line that it was to me anyway, a Roswell cadaver. And
Yeah, and just to be clear, like you and Mr. Schmidt took a lot of flack for being involved in that, but then we've got like Richard Dolan was involved in it, and Jaime Maussan, and a lot of other prominent research people
well,
were involved in it.
Richard wasn't involved in the analysis, and neither was Jaime. When Richard came on board, he was at the presentation to make a speech of whatever he wanted to add credence to our show. And Jaime provided the venue, which was magnificent. It was the National Auditorium in Mexico.
Yeah, it was like a big stadium, right? Because
yes, 8,000 people. It was the National Auditorium, the biggest auditorium in Mexico. You can't beat that.
well, between that and the pay-per-views, somebody made an awful lot of money out of
Yes, and
that thing.
it wasn't Don Schmidt and myself.
No, that's why I wanted to make clear. Like somebody made an awful lot of money out of that event between the pay-per-view and the tickets to see the live
Yes.
event, 8,000 people, and nobody's ever given any of that money back after it was proven it was a hoax. So to me, that's just consumer fraud.
Those two fellas disappeared on us, lickety split.
I could imagine. And there's been some talk. Somebody mentioned to me or claimed to me that you still, even after the revelation that it was a mummy and it was fake, refused to let it go for a while. Is that accurate, or did you?
I refused to let go until I saw the body that I was just telling you about.
Sure.
That was when I saw the body at the time it was discovered. I said, okay, that's it. So I let it go at that point. But up until that, Stephen, I thought that the translation of the placard itself was a hoax, because we tried for 3 years to translate it to learn what it said, and we couldn't do it. And it wasn't just Don Schmidt and myself. We sent out it to different parties. Even David Rudiak, who was the chief investigator on the so-called Ramey memo, we sent it to him, and he couldn't read it. So that was a big thing to us. Well, it's beyond being read, and then here comes somebody, and you could actually read the words. And I said, this can't be true, because we tried so hard for 3 years. So I held on to it until I actually saw the body when it was still still at the archaeology site. It was obviously the same body, and at that point I said, okay, this is in fact a mummy. I don't know what they did to it to clean it up. I really don't. But
Well, I think I did some work on that back when that happened. Believe it or not, I have a background in computer science, and I was trying to decipher what the placard said from the screenshot that somebody put on the website, which was extremely low res. But after the event, somebody posted a much higher resolution scan or photo or whatever of the mummy and the placard, and I was almost able to do it. Somebody beat me to it, though. They were so fast. It was because there's only so many pixels, and if you get an extremely low res, it's going to be too garbled. You're not going to be able to read it. But once you get that higher res image, it's going to be quick and easy. But you didn't have the higher res. You had the low res, like preview image instead of the higher res. They only let the higher res out after the event, And there's probably a reason for that. They knew. I think they knew what that placard said.
Yes, we didn't know, but the possessors, in retrospect now, I believe the possessors scrambled the words, or they did something to the placard that on the one slide that we had, that made it impossible to read because somebody got a hold, and I don't know
Yeah,
how
there we
that
go.
happened.
So I finally got it up here so we could see. I'm sorry. I'm never in Firefox, but there's some weirdness going on with the software to run the show, and I had to use Firefox tonight. So to share the screen was difficult. So here's the picture, and yeah, the placard, once clearly visible, it says this mummy of a 2-year-old found on the front of the second story of Montezuma Castle or something like that. Yeah, so the placard is pretty clear once you have the good image, but the original image, not so much. And there was so much, people, even like biologists looked at this thing and said there's not enough ribs, or there's the head and the eyes. This can't be a human. And here's a more accurate
Well,
representation of what the
look
original. You
in
couldn't
the
see anything on the placard at
yeah,
first.
in the upper right hand, look, the upper right hand corner. That's what I was looking at. And if you notice on the put up the right that one, yeah, on the upper right hand
Let me see if
corner,
I could get a better image of it.
yeah,
Maybe not.
and this was the
There we
there you
go.
go. This was the clincher for me. Here's what the clincher was. We had a first-hand witness. His name was Dan Dwyer. He was a fireman for the Roswell Fire Department. He got out to the site before the military got there, and he saw the bodies on the ground, and there was one that was still alive. Okay, so there were 2 dead and 1 still alive at this crash site, and we got the story from his daughter, Frankie Rowe, because Dan Dwyer was already dead by the time we got on the case. But when he got home that night, he told his family about being out at this crash site where a flying saucer had crashed, and there were bodies, and one was still alive. And the first thing they wanted to know was, well, Dad, what did it look like? And all he said was, "Child of the earth, child of the earth." Well, to me, that doesn't mean, I don't know. I'm from Philadelphia. I don't know what that means. Put the thing back up. Put the picture back up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try to do that again. With me here.
I'm going to tell you what the clincher was.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Waiting for the picture. There you go. Okay. So Dan Dwyer, they wanted to know what it looked like. And he didn't say, well, it had a big head and blah, 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 blah. He just said, child of the earth. And they said, oh, well, child of the earth to people living in New Mexico means another name for it is a potato bug, or the Jerusalem cricket. It's a little insect that has a head on it that reminds them of a newborn child. Okay.
Okay.
The head of this insect, the child of the earth, has a head on it that reminds them of a newborn child. Okay, so what am I talking about? Well, a newborn child has markings on its head because the bones of the skull, the parietals and the frontal bones, they haven't come together yet. So you have dark markings on the head of this newborn infant, and that's why they call this potato bug the child of the earth. Now, if you look at that picture, what do you see on the top of the head of that picture? There's dark markings. Okay, there's dark markings on the head of that cadaver, and to me, I'm saying there's nobody that could have hooked that. They wouldn't have known about it because nobody that I've ever talked to knows about what the markings on the head and that cadaver has markings on the head. And I said, oh my goodness, that's what Dan Dwyer was talking about, the markings on the head, why they called it the child of the earth. And for me, that was the clincher.
Yeah, yeah. I listen, and when this happened, I didn't blame you or anybody else involved one bit. And it's a shame that people, were nasty about it after the event. But I think there was a lot of people that were hopeful and then disappointed. I mean, it's the nature of a good hoax that people, want to believe. They think this might be the smoking gun proof and the evidence, and then you get your bubble burst, like my bubble got burst. It was a big disappointment to me.
It
I
was
thought this might be it, the smoking gun. We might actually have the proof now.
it was unbelievable. It was Stephen, based on the information we had when we went public with it, I would have had to come to the same conclusion because we could not read that placard. We tried for 3 years. We sent it to Adobe. We sent it to the U.S. Army Photo Interpretation Unit. David Rudiak, who's an expert in that, a couple other places. And I tried myself with my own photographic software. Over 3 years, I would try it a couple of times a week. Well, maybe I can break it today.
I did the same thing. I was doing the same thing. And I even went to a friend. I even went to a friend of mine who's an image analyst, like a serious image analyst. He's testified in court and things, and done photo analysis and image enhancement for police and things like that. And he just sent me back a message that said, "There's just not enough pixels there. You're never going to read this." But that, of course, was the original release, which was just a low res, grainy ass, terrible quality picture.
Yeah.
So once the event happened and the hoaxers got their money, I guess, then somebody uploaded that day, the day of the event, I think it happened, or the night of the event, somebody posted a really high quality picture on a blog, and then within hours, people were able to crack the code of that placard.
We were never able to. We were never able to. And when that was cracked, I thought that itself was a hoax until I actually saw the body that before it was removed from the archaeological site. That was it. I mean, it was the same mummy.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, just to wrap up what happened to this poor 2-year-old child, eventually museums and things in the United States went, it's really disrespectful to a human cadaver to put it on display, so we're going to bury it. And that's what they did. They gave it like a regular, they buried it with respect because it's a human being, and it's kind of disrespectful to stick it in a case and let everybody gawk at it. So they eventually, I think it was in the 50s or 60s maybe, they took it. And so this picture was taken in around the 1947 or 48, and then decades later, because of the change in thought and policy, and I think pressure from Native American groups and other things, they took the body out of the museum and they buried it. It
was originally found in either 1936 or 1939. I'm not sure which way, but it was in the 30s by a fellow by the name S.L. Palmer of San Francisco had it. Where it is today, I couldn't tell you. But
I believe it's still buried from what I know. I believe they buried it after a certain time.
Okay.
And that's
where it was remains. At Montezuma's Castle or something like that in New Mexico for a while.
Yeah, but what an interesting part of the history of Roswell, just like all these other, I've often joked that if you want, it seems to me that hoaxers are sometimes very crafty because they know that there's a already believed mythology of Roswell, that there were some bodies, there was a crash. So these people that are doing hoaxes, they tack their hoax onto something people already believe, which is that bodies may have crashed at Roswell. And that lends some legitimacy to their hoax, right?
Yeah. The other thing was that I have a background in physical anthropology, so I made a number of calls to physical anthropologists because I wanted them to take a look at this and tell me what they thought it was. And every one of them, what the first thing they wanted to know was, okay, what's the background story to this? Soon as they heard Roswell, they couldn't hang up fast enough.
Yeah, they don't want their name associated with that because that could be bad for
They
their.
couldn't hang up fast enough. And
But there were certainly some medical and pathologists or physical anthropologists that did offer some sort of opinion
yes,
that this that this wasn't human and
they were now PhDs, but former fellow graduate students along with me at the University of Toronto. So I knew them, and I knew that they were physical anthropologists. One was a primatologist, and the other was a geneticist. And they offered me opinions. The primatologist said, "Well, it's not a non-human primate. That's as far as she would go. She didn't know what it was, but she said it's not human. That's as far as she would go." And the other one we used on the show, he still believes. I mean, I'm still in touch with him. He still believes that it's from another planet because he says the bone structure of it is there's a lot different than humans, and he still believes that. But
well, maybe could it be like a human a deformed human like this Anakama that Stephen Greer was pushing for so long, right?
Yeah, the one that got me was there was this one anthropologist. He has a website, and his big pitch is, if you have any anthropological mysteries, please contact me. I love anthropological mysteries.
Oh, I heard to talk about this before. Yeah.
So I called him up and said, "Oh yeah." And as soon as he heard Roswell, I'm heading over to Africa. I'm going to be back and forth between here and Africa for the next year. So I'm sorry. Goodbye.
Yeah, he didn't want to get involved. Yeah, Mr. Mystery, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but what an interesting part of the mythology, right? That this whole event happened, and I remember like everybody was tuned into this, waiting to see what would happen if the proof would finally come out. And I remember there was talk of like finding it and getting DNA samples, but nobody really knew where it was because all we had was the slides, and it was a big, huge story.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have a slide that you could crack that placard. That was the biggest problem. Apparently, somebody got a hold of it. I don't know how they did. To be honest with you, Steve, I don't know how they got a hold of it. We didn't get. It wasn't given to us. And you're right. Somebody made some money on it. On the video, they had a big. You could stream it live stream it on your computer.
Yeah, I think it was like
But
$20. It was
it
like twenty
wasn't us.
dollars. Yeah, it was like $20 to watch the
Yes.
live stream, and then they had it in multiple languages even for the
Yep.
international audience. So
Yep.
yeah, you're right. Somebody made a ton of money on this
Yes. And
poor mummy.
it wasn't us.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can move on now because I have a whole bunch of questions left, and I'd like to leave some time for the live chat to ask you some questions if you don't mind. I wanted to get into Cal and I have another big disagreement, and that is on the debris switch. Because Cal's whole issue with the debris switch is that Stanton Friedman made that up. There was no debris switch. And for those unaware, those famous pictures of, of people holding the debris, and then, okay, it's just weather balloon debris. But later, Marcel said that both Marcel and Dubose, both who were in the room at the time those famous pictures were taken, later said that there was a debris switch. The debris that they held up in those pictures was not the debris that they picked up from the ranch.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the debris switch and what do you think of Mr. Korf's assertion or belief that the debris switch was just made up by Stanton Friedman to sell books?
No, Marcel and Friedman. Well, it was Berlin, not Berliner, but Berlitz and Moore, he says
Yeah,
it
Bill
was
Moore.
switched. He says it was switched. His son, Jesse Jr., who we also interviewed, said it was switched. And Jesse, I never met Jesse Sr. I don't know if Don or Kevin did, but I did. I never met Jesse Sr., but his son, Jesse Jr., he held pieces of the debris in his hand, especially the I-beam with the funny writing on it.
Yeah, the
And
hieroglyphics.
he also said, yes, you know, he was there when his father came home at 2 a.m. in the morning of July the 8th with the debris. He stopped at home with a car full of this debris that he had picked up on the Foster Ranch. And so he showed his son and his wife, I can't pronounce her last name, Vio, I think they pronounce it V-O. But he showed his wife and his son this wreckage. And Jesse Jr., who was a first-hand witness to the wreckage, said he'd never seen anything like it. I mean, he was 11 years old at the time, granted, but he knew about aircraft and planes and things like that. And he said there was this one piece. It looked like an I-beam. If you looked at it sideways, it had all this funny writing on it. And he saw the wreckage, and it was not tinfoil like a Ray Wind target. It was not a balloon. So you have him and his father saying the record that's not what was seen in the photographs. So I don't know what whoever's talking about that is saying.
Yeah, and one of the other things about those pictures, those famous pictures, is the so-called Ramey memo. You know, he's holding
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what are your thoughts on whether or not that memo says bodies and recovered saucer and things like that? Do you think that that is really good evidence, or do you think that people are reading into that text what they want to hear?
Just before I get to that, Stephen, I want to finish with this wreckage.
Oh, certainly.
There's another investigators trying to make a big issue out of the so-called, you know what the concept of chain of custody is?
Sure.
You know, you have a murder weapon in a criminal case. What's the chain of custody? Who had access to that murder weapon by the time it got to? So they're trying to say that because Jesse Marcel stopped at his home on the way back to the base with that wreckage, well, it broke the chain of custody. Oh wow, geez, be still my heart. Back then, the concept of chain of custody is a recent legal doctrine. Jesse Marcel didn't know anything about a so-called chain of custody doctrine.
Yeah, not in 47, sure.
He wanted to show his family something that they had never seen before and will probably never see again. And besides, legally today, you would say, oh, yeah, he did break the chain of custody because he didn't come straight back to the base. He stopped at home first. Oh, so what did he do? What did he do? Change a weather balloon into a piece of a spaceship? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And also, you have a whole field, a whole sheep pasture full of the wreckage out there. This is only a small portion of the wreckage. You have a whole 3 crash sites full of wreckage that we do know the chain of custody. So we could take Marcel out of the picture, and we still have the Roswell case. It's absolutely silly. Who's ever making that argument? Absolutely.
Yeah, just one more point on the debris. You know, Marcel was he was Army intelligence. He would have been familiar with weather balloons and things. So
yeah, he knew weather balloons. He knew the Ray Wind targets, especially. He knew them all. He's not going to make a mistake of confusing a Ray Wind weather target with a spaceship that traveled from another planet.
Yeah, and he famously said the material that I saw was not of this earth. That's what he said.
That's right. He
was that impressed with it.
he said it came to Earth, but it was not from this Earth. It was from another planet, something like that.
Yeah.
So he knew when he stopped at home on his way back to the base. His son said he was already talking about it as pieces of a flying saucer. He was already talking about it even before he got back to the base.
Wow. Yeah. So then on to the Ramey memo, because
Oh
a
yeah,
lot has been said about the Ramey memo. And for
yeah.
those that don't know, in the famous pictures that were taken of the Roswell debris, uh, he's holding a sheet of paper, and a lot of people have claimed that they were able to decipher exactly what is on that piece of paper, and it talked about recovering alien bodies and a crashed saucer. What do you think of the validity of that as evidence, and do you think that that
Well,
case will ever be cracked with
I
better
I
imaging
can
software?
tell you firsthand. This is even before I heard of David Rudiak, who did most of the work on this, most of the best work. Um, Stanton Friedman had gone to the Bettman archives at the I forget the where the images are stored. The University of Texas at Arlington archives. That's where the photo images are stored, and he had the photo in question photographed, and he made a CD disc out of it, DVD or CD. With images of the memo. So I
Yeah.
called up Stan. I said, I'm good for the money. I'll send you. He was selling it for $25. I said, send it to me. The check is in the mail. So Stan sent me
Yeah, I
a
got one of those too, by the
yeah.
way.
So
I
here's
have it. I have it on a shelf over here.
the
I do. Before he died, I got to
yeah.
interview him about a year,
Well, that's
maybe
what
2 years before he died. And one of the things we talked about off air was that high quality scan. And I said, I'm a computer science guy. Send it to me. I might be able to get something out of it. I wasn't able to do any better than Mr. What
well
was it, Rudiak, right?
here's what happened to me. So I had not heard of David Rudiak. I didn't know what the memo said. At So I put it in my computer, and within 10 seconds, Stephen, I read the victims of the wreck you forwarded to, and then Ramey's thumb is in the picture at Fort Worth, Texas. Within 10 seconds, I read the victims of the wreck you forwarded to Fort Worth, Texas. That's no lie. And other words that I could, looking down, I read, I could read meaning of the story. I could read
Mhm.
meaning of the story. And I could also read weather balloons would make or weather balloons would fare. And something, and the last sentence was uh, cruise, something cruise, work cruise, demo cruise, something about cruise. And I could also see the word something in or on the disc. The word disc was in quotation marks. So that's what I could read. And David Rudiak, who's a doctor of optometry,
Yeah, he's got a better resume than me, but I still thought I'd give it a shot. I did, and I wasn't able to do any
yeah.
better. But I probably did worse than him. I
So
did worse than him.
David Rudiak was able to get more out of it because he worked feverishly on it, and he was able to translate more of it. And what it's talking about, it's talking about a second sight. Uh, it's talking about having Raywin demonstrations, and they did on starting on July 10, they had the Army Air Corps the Army do these demonstrations of these weather balloons attached to a radar target to sort of prove the press release that it wasn't a spaceship but a Raywin weather balloon tinfoil target. So it talks about having Ray-wind demonstration crews. That's what it was doing. And for the next couple of days, they had these demonstrations all over the country with these mobile launches of the weather balloon and the radar target. So hats off to David Rudiak. He did the most work on this. And apparently,
yeah, and I've heard critics just say, well, people are reading whatever they want, but I mean,
baloney.
it seems to me to be a very scientific analysis of this memo from a super high quality scan that Stanton Friedman got from the original archive, from the original negatives of the photo, a super high quality scan of the photo. So they got the most high quality image that they could, and then it was scientifically analyzed.
I tell you, when I looked at it the first time, I had no preconceptions of what it was going to say. But you have to think of the circumstances. He's holding the memo in his hand at a press conference that's going to it's going to explain away UFO or flying saucer crash wreckage as a Ray-wind weather balloon target. So that he has that in his hand, and there were 7 photographs taken, 6 of them of 2 of them of Jesse Marcel, 2 of General Ramey by himself, 2 of General Ramey with his adjutant Thomas Jefferson
Dubose, yeah,
and 1 with the weather guy Irving Newton, who he called in. But between those 7 photos, you could tell what the sequence of the photos and what sequence they were taken by the memo in his hand, because the first photo in the sequence, he's just received the memo. It's only folded over once, but in that final photo that shows the wording that we're talking about, you can see it's been folded several times. So that's the final photo. He's trying to grab a look at it, what it's saying between shots, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and it's very tantalizing because some of these images, I mean, it looks like you can almost read it, and these are like pretty,
The problem, Stephen, is that if you enlarge it, you're also enlarging the grain. The photo was taken from about 15 feet away, I would say, 10 to 15 feet away, and it's a little telex or memorandum.
Yeah, old camera.
You have to keep enlarging it, and when you do that, you also enlarge the distortion in the grain. So it's pretty much all we're going to get out of it.
Well, do you think though that like maybe in 10 or 20 years, when photo image analysis software gets better, that we might be able to get more out of it, or do you think we've gotten all?
I hope so. I hope it's sooner than that.
Yeah, it just always seems so tantalizing because here we just see this image, and it looks, even in this image, which is just like a crop of the original photo, it looks like you can almost read it, right? It really does look like you can almost read it.
I've tried it for over, let's see, I forget what year I got it, but it seems like I've been trying for 20 years. Like, okay, maybe today I'll be able to see more, but it never happens.
All right,
not unless I get a better photo package.
Sure, and I guess moving on, I wanted to discuss the multiple crash sites because there seems to be some debate even amongst researchers that are pro the alien hypothesis. Some people believe that these additional crash sites were tacked on after the actual event, and that there was really only 1 crash site. Some people say there was a lot of people say there was 2, and I've heard some people say no, there was 3 different crash or debris sites. Can you talk a little bit about the sequence of events that led to the multiple crash sites, if you believe there was? Yes.
When I first got started on the case in 1991, the only book out at that time was the Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore. That was the only book out. Stanton Friedman did the investigation with Moore. Berlitz had the big name because he had just written a book about the Bermuda Triangle, which was a big seller. So that's how they put his name on the book.
Mhm.
But in the Roswell incident, they have the Mac Brazel story with that one debris, we call it the debris field site, up 33 miles southeast of Corona, New Mexico. That's where the ship exploded in the air and all this debris came floating down on the evening of July the 2nd, 1947. That's the first site that anybody knew about. And so Moore and Friedman, that that they had heard stories about bodies, but there were no bodies at that site. It just physical wreckage. The only body site circulating at that time was a story by a soil conservation engineer by the name of Barney Barnett, who worked out of office in Socorro, New Mexico. And his story was that he was coming home from Dattle, New Mexico one day, and something caught his eye out in the desert. And so he went out to investigate, and it was a crashed flying saucer with a couple with alien bodies strewn about. And it was on the plains of San Augustine. And that was the only body story going around. So Friedman and Moore tacked that Barney Barnett story onto the Roswell story. And that site is 150 miles west of the Corona site. So when I entered the case, Randall and Schmidt had already pretty much dismissed the Corona, the Socorro site, Plains of San Augustine, as having anything to do with the Roswell site, because there was only the one witness, Barney Barnett. There were no other witnesses, military or civilian. Blah blah blah. Nothing to go on. Just that the one story from Barney Barnett, and they had witnesses telling Randall and Schmidt of another site closer to Roswell. Well, they discovered a site through one of the children who were with Mac Brazel the morning that he discovered the debris field site. His name was Timothy D. Proctor. That there was a secondary site 2.5 miles east of the debris field site, and he was with Mac Brazel when they found it. And at that site, he told his mother, and we got the story from his mother. Here's where Mac found something else. It was a low bluff, and he took his mother out there when she was on her sickbed. He thought she was on her deathbed, but he was so determined to show her this site before she passed away. Well, she didn't. She only passed away many years later, but he plopped her in his pickup truck, and out into the desert they go. And he took her to this low bluff 2.5 miles east of the debris field site. And he said, "Mom, this is where Mac found something else." Now, that something else was not wreckage. It was two bodies. It was two bodies that when the ship exploded, the two aliens were thrown out, and they came to rest on this low bluff. And that's the second site. We call it the D. Proctor body site. He wouldn't take his deathbed mother out to show her another site. Well, here's where Matt found some more wreckage. I mean, there was so much wreckage in the debris field site. I mean, it just wasn't anything that he would do that. So it was two bodies. So that's the second site, 2.5 miles east of the debris field site. Well, we had a number of witnesses telling us about a third site. We call the impact.
If there's plane crashes, isn't there, when there's plane crashes, you can find bodies miles away from the main debris site? Or I would think so, right?
Well, it's only 2.5 miles. I mean, the thing exploded, and the thing was that the inner cabin of the ship, or an escape pod of some sort, withstood the blast. There was a capsule inside where there was the inner cabin or something was able to, it was egg shaped. It was able to withstand the blast and continued on for another 30 miles and came to rest 32 miles northwest of Roswell. Now, apparently these two creatures or aliens were not inside this capsule at the time, and
They
were
must have got
outside of it
ejected. Yeah.
and were blown out, and they came to rest down on this low bluff. We had another witness who told about that site and seeing the bodies. There's a second witness besides D. Proctor who actually described the bodies to us. Well, this capsule, it continues on for another 30 miles and finally comes to rest 32 miles northwest of Roswell. We call that the impact site. That's where, in addition to this egg-shaped affair was found, two more dead aliens were found, and one was still alive, was found at this third site. So those are the three sites.
Okay, well that makes a little more sense to me, and it seems to be a logical thing that if there was some kind of event that caused the craft to go down, that it could come down three separate places, just like an airplane could come down three separate places. But back to the bodies, you've talked to a lot of witnesses about what happened to the bodies. Can you talk briefly about what did they do, the government, with these bodies?
Well, the dead ones, of course, were boxed up. I mean, there was a call to this mortician, Glenn Dennis. At least he told the story at the time. We have witness that he told people at the time that he had received calls from the air base, Roswell Army Airfield, as it was called. He had received calls inquiring about their availability of child-sized caskets. And Glenn, I think he said, well, we have one, but we can get more. And they actually, next door to Ballard's at the time, there was a mortuary services department, that sold things like tombstones and caskets and all that sort of stuff. And they actually went to Amarillo and picked up the caskets. So the story about caskets is true because Glenn Dennis told two of the witnesses that we know of, he told it to, where one was a policeman, the other was a judge. So, I mean, it's not like
yeah, those are pretty credible witnesses.
Yeah,
but I have heard a lot of people sort of rip apart Glenn Dennis as a witness and the nurse story and things like that. What do you think of that story?
Yes, we believe the part about
the caskets,
the phone calls and the caskets. We believe that part. The other part about him going to the base and running into a nurse friend, et cetera, et cetera. He lied to us about the name of the nurse. And we spent a good 2 years trying to find her, and we couldn't find a nurse with the name of Naomi Maria Self. And so we went to Glenn. We can't find, there's no Maria. We can't find that nurse anywhere as ever being in the Army. He said, well, I gave you a phony name. Oh God, thank you. Oh, it's just
thanks. I just wasted all this time. Yeah,
we just wasted 2 years on that, and you're telling us you lied to us. So that part of his story is, we just take that away.
Mr. Schmidt, also, you talked about chain of custody. So if we do get into the chain of custody of these bodies, so allegedly they called and asked about child-sized coffins, and then the bodies were then flown to where? Wright-Patterson, right?
Well, they were taken to the base first. They were taken to the base like everything else. First went to the base hangar, the big hangar there.
Hmm.
It's still there. It's Building 84. It's still a working hangar, but back then it was Hangar P as in Paul 3. And that's where everything went, including the bodies made their first stop there before they were transferred to the base hospital. Excuse me. And then they were flown out in two separate flights to Wright Field, soon to be Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. But back then it was called Wright Field. But those were the cadavers. We don't know how long the live one, we believe the live one stayed on the base in Roswell
Oh
for
yeah,
another.
you gotta talk about the live one because there's been various reports that one of them was alive. And this
Well,
is where we get some of these stories about the alien being interviewed or telepathically communicating with people, or they tried to like interrogate him, find out where he was from, what he was doing on Earth. Because you can imagine if you're in the army, especially if you're a high ranking officer and you're concerned about a threat, they would have interviewed him and found out what the hell were you
well,
doing here on Earth, right? Is this
well, here,
a recon for an invasion force or something, right? Can you
yeah,
talk about the live one? Because this is a fascinating part of the story.
okay. The live one was first seen, like I said, Dan Dwyer, the Roswell fireman, saw the live one out at the impact site, walking around. And his family, after they learned what it looked like, they said, "Well, did you talk to it? Did you talk to it?" And he said, "Yes, we talked to one another, but we didn't talk like we're talking now with our mouths. And, we didn't talk like we talk. We talked to one another in our heads, like mental telepathy." And the being sensed that Dan Dwyer was concerned about it. And so what it said to Dan Dwyer mentally was, "Don't worry about me. I accept my fate. My comrades are dead. My ship is destroyed. There's not anything I can do. I accept my fate." And that was
Okay.
that was all was exchanged between Dan Dwyer and the live one out at the site. Well, the military then arrives and takes everything, the bodies and the live one back to the base. So uh, the live one, we believe, remained at the base for a period of time because we have a witness or two that saw it there, and we think it was kept for a time at the guardhouse, for first at the hospital. But once it was, ambulatory, they kept it at the guardhouse. Believe it or not, in military fatigues that didn't fit. So
Wow.
we got that story from a lawyer, a JAG, judge
That's
advocate.
interesting.
Yeah, that was from a judge advocate lawyer who was going to the guardhouse to visit another prisoner, and he looked into one of the cells, and there's this thing with a big head, no hair, and in fatigues that it was the fatigues were way too big for it. He said he'd never seen anything in his life like that. So we're guessing. I admit it's a speculation that was the live one that was still being kept at the base. But eventually, it wound up at Wright Field like the others, because the following spring, it's now April of 1948, it is seen by a Air Force, what do they call it? War class. They're the officers who the Air Force deemed were going to lead the Air Force into the future. The Air War College class of 1948. Out of Maxwell Air Force Base in Louisiana. They were flown to Wright Field in April of 1948. They're in training, how to run bases, blah 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 blah. Administrate and other things. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? So they're led into this hangar. The class is led into this hangar one day, and so they're standing around. What are we supposed to do here? And then they wheel in a couple tables, display tables full of this wreckage, and they said, "Okay, guys, have at it. Tell us what you think of this wreckage here." And so they pick up this wreckage. Some of it is stiff as a board. They can't do. It's all very thin, like thin foil. Other wreckage you can wad up and let it go, and it just floats there. Just floats there. What the hell is this stuff? And somebody said, "Wait, we've never seen anything like this. Where did you get it?" And the facilitator says, "Well, we got it last summer from a flying saucer crash in New Mexico." That's what he told them. And some
Interesting.
of them hadn't even heard of this.
And you have multiple witnesses to this event, right?
Yes, yes. And so they're led into another room. If they're scratching, because some of the people hadn't heard of. They were not all U.S. airmen. Some were from other countries, like Australia, And so they're led into another room, and it's 4 walls, but on the one wall is this large rectangular mirror. It's a two-way mirror, because if you're in the adjacent room, you look at this, you just see a I don't know, a picture or something blank. But on the one side, you can see through, like your magic decoder ring, it's the city.
Yeah.
So we get this story from a Marine Air Force night fighter pilot in World War II named Marion Magruder. He's now Lieutenant Colonel. The lowest rank, by the way, in this Air War College class is Lieutenant Colonel. It goes all the way up to General.
So there's some high-ranking officers then.
Yes. Yeah, it's not they're not enlisted men, no enlisted men, no lieutenants, no majors, no captains. You had to be a lieutenant colonel or higher. So Marion Magruder's telling his son, he's got 5 sons, their first names all begin with M. So he's telling his sons about this trip because they had just witnessed the moon landing. And the moon landing sort of was like a catharsis to a lot of these people who had been keeping the secret all these years.
Yeah.
With the moon landing, it had an effect on a number of them where they started talking about this. And Marion Magruder was one of them. So he says, "Well, we went into this room and there was this see-through mirror. So we all looked through it. I looked through it, and here was this strange being. It had about 40 pounds. It looked squiggly." He said, "How would you describe it?" "It looked squiggly." That's how he described it. And it had a large head, a frail body, long arms, long spindly legs. Well, what was it doing, Dave? Well, was it just standing or no? It wasn't standing there. It wasn't doing push-ups. It wasn't sitting down. It wasn't doing the Macarena. It was just standing there. It was just standing there. And Magruder said, all of a sudden, I had a feeling of great empathy came over me between me and this creature. He says, we weren't talking to, but this great feeling of empathy came over me, and I was seeing its human-like qualities rather than its alien-like qualities. And that's all he said about it. He didn't say they talked or anything, but he just felt its human qualities of this creature. Wow. And so they said, "Well, what happened to it?" And he said, "They killed it." Well, wow. They killed it. Well, there was another witness, the son of a photographer back in 1947, the son, Jack Rodden. His father had a top secret clearance. He could take pictures on the base of whatever. And the son, Jack Jr., said he knew his father was out there at this time. He said, what about the aliens? What about the live one? Because he knew about the live one. He said, so Jack Sr. says they killed it. And so Jack Jr. said, do you mean they killed the story? They killed the alien? They killed what? And he just said they killed it. Well, it's not that they lined it up. If you saw the movie, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, it's not like they lined it up.
They didn't put him in an electric chair or something.
It wasn't that at all. It was that, like you said, they wanted to learn it. It only stands to reason that they wanted to learn as much as they could from it. And certainly they were no doubt they were talking mentally to it. They were trying to learn as much as they could. They were doing various tests on it. How does it cope with this or that, or whatever? And during one of the tests, it died, and that's how it died. We don't know what year that was, but there's several stories that it lived until 1952. There were stories that it liked strawberry ice cream. Well, that's impossible.
I remember that from UFO Live. Yeah, that old special.
That's impossible because its mouth just opened into an orifice, a cavity. There was no digestive system. The mouth just was like a little cavity. That's all.
Yeah, I've heard it described that way. One of the interesting things is if you've got a live alien, I mean, you got to figure out like what is its source of nutrition, what does it need as far as atmospheric conditions for its health, and it could be anything. It could be all different.
Apparently, it could survive in our air. Of course, there's no testimony about a breathing device of any sort. But we don't know how it got its nutrition. We do not know that. But it did. It's not from strawberry ice cream.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of ridiculous in that UFO Live special. I remember that and thinking, well, that's a weird sort of tidbit to add, right? So I guess there goes the story of the live alien, which is, to me, I've heard all these different and read these different eyewitness testimonies to this live alien. It's pretty interesting. But what do you think? So the dead bodies go to Wright-Patterson. Do you have any insight into what happened to them? Were they autopsied? Were they taken apart, or what did they do with the dead bodies?
We have multiple witnesses, both civilian and military, that of course it was autopsy. The dead ones were autopsied. Apparently, one or two of them were not in such great shape, but there were 4 dead ones originally, and plus the live one, whenever that died. But they were autopsied, and originally they were kept in what they call the ice house. It was right next to. You've heard about Hangar 18, right?
Yeah, it was really Building 18, but yeah.
Yeah, well, Hangar 18 was really Hangar 23, but because there were like 8 or 9 buildings that they called it the Building 18 complex. There were like 7, 8, 9 buildings, all called 18A through 18G, 18A, 18B, 18C, up to G. But there was only one hangar in this complex, and it was Hangar 23. Well, everybody just referred to it because it was right in the middle of this complex as Hangar 18. And that's where, during World War II, all of the back engineering and testing, aircraft testing, took place. So it was
foreign technology, right?
So it was only natural that that's where the wreckage would come to try to.
Yeah, there's nothing more foreign than alien technology. So
yes,
it does make sense.
It was really foreign.
For those that don't know, Mr. Carey and Dunchman also wrote an amazing book, one of my favorites, UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson, Eyewitness Accounts from the Real Area 51, which, there's so many stories about Wright-Patterson having these tunnels underground and having these secret facilities to study foreign technology, and that's where people say the aliens are kept and that the wreckage went. And it was studied. They attempted to back engineer some of it. What do you think of these various stories of people who claim to have Roswell debris? Because those stories never seem to pan out under scientific scrutiny. Once the stuff is tested, it's like, well, it's aluminum. You know, it's nothing out of this world.
Well, so far as I know, there's never been any pieces of wreckage that have come forward that have passed muster. Uh, some years ago, the UFO Museum in Roswell, dedicated to the Roswell incident, offered $1 million to anyone who could produce an incontrovertible piece of physical wreckage from the Roswell crash. And some tried, but one turned out to be a piece of Japanese jewelry. Another turned out to be a little medallion that was actually sold in the gift shop of the museum.
Oh boy. Well, you can't blame them for trying. That's a million reasons to come up with some alien wreckage, right?
But
because some of these things are resurfacing again. We've had Arts Parts, and I'm not even going to mention her, but there's a researcher that pushed those for years, and then scientists that she hired to do the analysis said no, it's normal earthly metals. She didn't like that, so she hired new guys that would say that there was something weird about the metals, and then she sells them to TTSA, and now they're pushing them as possibly alien materials. But we never get to the proof of these people making these claims, and that's disappointing.
Yes. Oh, it is. It is. It's actually the most disappointing thing about the case because there were so many little pieces of wreckage, and the ranchers always, whatever crashes out in the desert, the ranchers and their children always get to it first to pick up first, to see if anybody's hurt, but then to pick up little pieces of the wreckage. And we suspect that that's what happened here because the ranchers and their children got to the site first. And we've heard about so and so having a piece. In fact, some people admitted to having a piece, but over the years, it became lost somewhere. And
see, this is the tantalizing part. Like, you could have had the proof and you lost it in your attic or something, right? Or your garage, and you can't find it, or you moved and threw it out. You know, that's the tantalizing part to me.
Yes.
Listen, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but if you don't mind, I'm sure that we have some questions in our live chat. If you don't mind, somebody asked, or do you believe that any of the, it was Courtney Shane asked, do you believe that any of the pictures of aliens floating around on the internet are genuine or related to the Roswell event, or are they all phony? Do you believe any of them are the real McCoy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't believe, I've never seen a picture of a Roswell alien that I consider that was genuine. So I would say right now there are none that are out there that are genuine.
Yeah, and people are always sending me pictures and swearing like, no, this one's real. And then if you do a Google image search, you find out like somebody just sent me one on Twitter or replied on Twitter, and then it turned out to be from a movie, and somebody cropped out. You know what I mean? Like they just cropped the alien and put it in, and then we've got people claiming, oh, here's a picture of a gray alien taken on the moon, and that one turned out, I busted them. It turned out to be from a 2005 video game cover of a video game, Area 51, where you run around shooting aliens, and the alien was on the cover of the video game. And people put that behind a paywall, and we're charging people $3 to see the picture. They never seem to pan out, right?
I've never seen a verifiable piece of wreckage or a verifiable genuine photograph, although we are looking for both. And here's the thing about the wreckage, Stephen, is that the wreckage, some of them have been put forth by other investigators, and they say, oh, here's a piece, we're going to send it out for analysis. Well, that's the last you hear about it. You never hear what the analysis was. And so that's one of the problems. We're looking for actually a piece of the memory metal. That's what we're looking for, because you don't have to send that out. You can see
if it reacts like people have described, you're going to know right away that that's something out of this world.
Yes. So
Yeah.
that's our holy grail. We call it our holy grail of Roswell, is the piece of the memory metal. And we know there are some pieces out there, but so far the people have not come forth with them. It's a shame. So there's another fella. Here's another one, and this fella's been on several cable shows. He goes out to the debris field site with a Geiger counter, and he's been finding these little pieces, and they're aluminum. They're aluminum, and so he's had them tested on several shows, and they always come back 99.99997 aluminum. And well, it's still, I don't know. That's what you get so far. That's what you get so far. We do know that most of the pieces were palm sized. They were palm sized. There were some larger pieces, but the overwhelming majority of the debris, because this explosion just shattered the ship, except for that inner cabin. And the other thing about it, Stephen, there was no moving part on it. We got that from a witness, a military witness who was in the hangar, who saw all the wreckage. There was no moving part on it. So,
Yeah, that's pretty. I've heard that various descriptions too. Like there was no rivets, there was nothing that you could, no
right.
power source,
So
engine, anything that you could identify as earthly technology or methodology for building aircraft.
So how did it get from there to here? How did they do it without a moving part? And that's we've had some testimony recently about, because our mandate is to decide the case, whether was it mundane or was it extraterrestrial. That's been our mandate, and we don't do a whole lot of thinking about where did they come from, why are they here. That's for other people to figure out. So, but
Well, yeah, that would get into just pure speculation. I
yeah,
often thought that it was anthropological. You
yeah.
know, like if we find some primitive, if we humans find some primitive tribe that's been untouched by technology, we're going to go out and study them because it may
Oh
tell us
yeah. But the thing is, I was leading up to that. I have
something
been
about our
doing
own knowledge of
I
the human
have been
species.
I have been doing some thinking about this. How do they get from there to here if there's no moving part? And obviously, it's not from our own solar system. They're not from our own solar
Hmm.
system. So they're from another solar system, most likely in the Milky Way galaxy, right? Even though there's
Hmm.
100 million galaxies in the universe, they're most likely from the Milky Way. But even there, the distances are so astronomically long that you can't get from there to here using uh, motors or things that we currently have. So how did they do it? So they must have somehow uh, bend space to where it's only a short leap, because the long distances in the universe, there you just can't do it. So they must have somehow solved the space time
Hmm.
continuum, right? So we have, in researching our last book, and called, what is that called? It's called Roswell: The Ultimate Cold Case Closed, and we are work. Every time I think it's closed, we're working on another book. We're working on two more. There's one going to come out this year, and one going
Yeah.
to come out next year. But thinking about how they were able to get here from there, we had the testimony of one scientist. He was a naval scientist, a commander named George Hoover, who worked with Werner von Braun in the rocket program, and they were also part of the Roswell analysis. The whole Roswell picture. And according to Hoover, when he was interviewed, he said Roswell was a case of visitors from somewhere else. Now, what did he mean by that? He said, well, they're not so much extraterrestrial as they were extra temporal, i.e., time travelers.
Time travel. Yeah, I've heard that theory, or interdimensional.
And he said they were potentially us from a future Earth. Now, coming from Uncle Harry over a couple of drinks, I'm just going to take that. It's going to go in one ear and out the other, But coming from a fellow who worked with Werner von Braun and all the other scientists on the rocket program and the Roswell case itself, to say that, you have to give that some consideration.
It's pretty credible. Here's a great question from the audience. Philip Blair asks, what do you think of Dr. Jacques Vallée's work to have materials from other crash sites tested at private laboratories in Silicon Valley? Have you followed that? And what do you think of Mr. Vallée?
I have not followed that, but I'm saying make sure you get it back. Because things have a habit, if it turns out to be something, you never see them again. So I think it's a good idea. The name Jacques Vallée is known worldwide. I've never met him, but he has some interesting theories. If he has some material that he wants tested, go for it. And but make sure you get it back, and let's hear what the results are.
Yeah, well, he's got some tantalizing sort of results about. They're always talking about isotopic ratios, which means that metal couldn't have come from our solar system. But then, to me, a lot of that stuff could be metal parts of meteorites,
right?
Because they're just showing you this metal blob that doesn't,
We got to have the memory metal, because you don't need it. You don't need to send that away to get tested. You can put it through its paces. We don't have anything like that. We've got something they tried to create like it, but it's nowhere near as good as the original.
Okay, Paul Cargo asks, are there actual video recordings of any lieutenant colonels stating they saw live aliens and UAP wreckage while in training? Well, they're quoted in your books, though, right? I don't know that there's video recordings or audio recordings.
No, we're not aware of any live recordings of whether they recorded their observations. I don't know, but the live recordings were never mentioned, so we have to assume that there weren't any. Certainly not any that we could have access to.
I want to make sure that I take a moment just to plug your books. If you just put Tom Carey's name into Amazon, you'll get treated to a whole bunch of amazing books. And I got to say that the first one that I read was Witness to Roswell, and then I instantly went and ordered more, because every one of them seems to me to be well researched. And I got to say that I disagree with Cal Korff's assertion that all these people that you and Schmidt talked to for 30 years, for decades, all just made this stuff up. It doesn't seem, it just doesn't seem likely to me, especially the military people. My father was in the military, and he was just like a no-nonsense kind of guy. All his military friends, they just weren't bullshitters. That's the plainest way to put it. Yeah. So we've had these very high-ranking military officials basically admit that there was an alien crash landing and there was bodies and more. So I'm back to the side of the alien hypothesis.
We have too many witnesses. You have to to think that way. You have to think that back in 1947, they all got together and said, okay, look, decades from now, people are going to come calling, and let's get our stories. Let's really cook up some stories. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
I agree with you. And Mortimer James asked, we touched on this briefly, but what do you think of the pieces? They were called Art's parts that Art Bell got and Linda Moulton Hale was pushing as alien pieces of wreckage.
that's one of the things I'm talking about. The arch parts. I saw them. I mean, I didn't handle them. I saw pictures of them, and I'm thinking, what the hell is this? That doesn't look like anything to me.
Could be anything. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I assume they got them tested, but I have no idea what the results of the tests are. And this is what I'm talking about. What
Yeah,
did,
it's kind of like a back and forth though, because the first person that tested them said these are ordinary earthly metals. Here's the lab reports, and Linda Moulton Howe didn't like that report, so she hired new guys that would go out on a limb and say that they were more than earthly materials. And then she sells them to TTSA, who is now claiming that they have alien wreckage or may have alien wreckage, but we never get the lab result. It's very easy to put them in a spectrometer. Like
right,
it's very easy. Put a piece in a spectrometer. It'll tell you what the elemental makeup of the material is, what the isotopic ratios are. If it's aluminum, titanium, whatever it is, the spectrometer will tell you. It doesn't take 20 years to test the material.
right,
And then we have all this talk about metamaterials. Metamaterials are not alien. They're just a very specialized, newer form of new kind of material.
right,
So I have a real problem with people that go and try to make money or documentaries or television shows claiming they have this alien material, but we never get the lab results. Never. We
right.
never get them. Yeah,
Well,
so I wanted to say, to make sure that I say, you can search Tom Carey on Amazon and all of your books. And you said you're working on a new book, right?
yes, it's called Touched by Roswell. It's about famous people, the rich and famous, actors and actresses and rich, famous people that somewhere in their lives, their life and Roswell crossed.
Do you have the story of Jackie Gleason? Did you know that
Yeah,
story?
that's one of them.
Oh, that's one of my favorite stories because I not only have I heard that in media, but I heard that from somebody that sort of worked with or for him, who told me that Jackie Gleason, to his death, was convinced that he saw an alien body.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great story.
with Richard Nixon. Yes.
Yeah,
It's like there's it's famous people who in some way their lives crossed with the Roswell incident, and
interesting.
we're working on it right now. It should be out mid-year this year.
Well, good for you. And I one more question, and we'll try to wrap it up here. I'm not sure how to ask this, so I'll just say, has Tom Carey ever had a conversation with former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid?
No, but I've read Reed's comments about UFOs. He has worked. I guess he got Bigelow Aerospace involved, and thanks to Harry Reid, I believe the U.S. Defense Department, as we speak, is supposed to have a report.
Yeah, within the next 120 days. It was 180. We're down to about 120 days. I can't wait to read that.
Yes, yes. And here's the thing about that is how do you know what they tell you is going to be the truth?
Yeah, because we have this Roswell case closed report that is just filled with inaccuracies and garbage information
Yeah,
and ridiculous explanations like, oh, those bodies were anthropomorphic dummies that were dropped 10 years after the Roswell event, and people just, time dilation or something. They forgot when they saw those things. Yeah, I don't trust anything. I have two rules now. It used to be that my rule was I never trust anything the government tells me without doing my own due diligence and research. And now I've added to that, I don't trust anything the mainstream media tells me without doing my own due diligence and research into those things. So listen, I'm going to ask you this because this is important. And then I'm going to solo you for this because I want you to spend just a few minutes, and you've been studying this thing longer than most people, almost longer than I've been alive, right? So I want to know really what is your bottom line? What is your take after talking to all these witnesses? What actually happened at Roswell? You've studied this thing longer than most people. I want to hear you give us your best case. What really crashed at Roswell?
Well, uh, it's of course it's based on witness testimony, observing the witnesses and weighing what they say, and there's no doubt in my mind that on the evening of July the 2nd, near midnight, a craft of unknown origin blew up during a thunder and lightning storm in Central High, New Mexico, scattering debris across a sheep pasture. There were 5 occupants. 4 of them met their fate. 1 was still alive. They were recovered first to the Roswell Army Airfield. A headline went out that they had recovered a flying saucer. The headline was changed within hours to that it was a weather balloon, but it was in fact, they were right the first time. A flying saucer crashed. We don't know where it was from. We know how many occupants there were. It was ultimately taken to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. That's where it was analyzed. That's where the bodies went. That's where the live one went. They did tests on the live one. Certainly, they did autopsies of the dead ones. They were kept there for years. And we believe, based on testimony, that the stuff was moved in the early 1980s to Area 51 in Nevada, kept there for a number of years. And according to witness testimony, we believe the 5 Roswell aliens are now residing in Dugway, Utah. And the wreckage, the physical wreckage now is in private hands. By that, I don't mean Uncle Harry or Aunt Lucy. I mean in private companies that do business with the federal government. That's where the wreckage is residing today. They're still testing it. And the reason that it's in private hands is that they don't have to answer freedom of information requests. Like, if you're a government agency, you're subject to FOIA requests. Well, private companies are not. So, yes, it was. Now, in my mind, I'm starting to lean towards extra temporal or extra dimensional as opposed to extraterrestrial. I'm straddling a fence on that right now. So, because of the quality of the testimony regarding the potential time travelers, and so that's where I'm at. Yes, it was of unknown origin. It was either extraterrestrial or extratemporal. It was covered up. It's still covered up. I don't know what's going to take place with this 180, this report that's due out now in 100, I guess it's mid-June, end of June, what that's going to say, whether it's going to address Roswell at all, because there were human rights violations perpetrated upon civilians to cover that up, they certainly would not be happy to talk about. But we know that death threats were issued to cover it up, and a lot of bad stuff went on. But that's what I believe. And whether it will ever come out, I don't know. But I can tell you this, but I can't give you the answer. I know where the wreckage is today. I know where the bodies are. But we're not going to release that information until that book. We have a issue. Our book Witness to Roswell was our best seller. So in 2022 will be 75 years, believe it or not, since the event. So in 2022, we're coming out with the 75th anniversary issue of Witness to Roswell. we're going to have new information in there, and certainly we will have the information as to where we know that the wreckage is, where it's at, where the bodies are, and what tests they're doing on the wreckage. So that's what I believe.
Wow, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, having read so many of your books. I want to thank you so much. I'm sorry we went a little over time. I think, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but I'm going to have to let you go. I hope that you'll come back. We might have a few more people, including Mr. Schmidt. I thought it'd be best just to interview you guys separately, because I know you're a team, but I thought you'd each have your own sort of perspective about things, and I'd rather interview you separately. So we're going to have him and maybe a few other people. I did want to ask you, just briefly before you go, though, Walter Bosley, has a pretty interesting idea, but it's mostly speculation.
I never heard that name before. I don't know who he is.
Okay, well, his take on the Roswell event was that it wasn't alien, and it was sort of like a test flight, rocket test flights, early space rocket test flights. What do you think of that theory?
Are we almost done?
Yeah, we're done. Okay.
All right. I'm sorry. What is that based on? What is that based on?
I think just on Project Paperclip and some of the early tests with the V2s.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. If the Germans had UFOs, flying saucers, we'd be speaking German now. And
yeah, I agree with you.
I'm sorry. That is so ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, we're free to disagree here. I appreciate your perspective. I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to wrap up the show. I want to thank you so much. It's really been an honor and a privilege.
My mother said if I can't speak nice of somebody.
My mom said the same thing. Don't say anything at all. Exactly. All right, well, I'm going to toss you out of here now. I appreciate your time very much. Everybody, listen, if you want to hear more, if you want to read more, go to Amazon. Just put in Tom Carey or Don Schmidt into the search box, and you'll find a whole bunch of great books. Every book that I've gotten from him, I thoroughly enjoyed. I want to get some more. So thanks very much for your time, Mr. Carey.
My pleasure, Stephen. You have a great evening.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Carey. Bye-bye. All right. Well, there you go, friends. We are continuing in this Revisiting Roswell, and what an amazing journey it has been. I want to thank our guest tonight, Mr. Tom Carey, who you guys have heard me mention these books time and time again. Witness to Roswell. If you only get two, get Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell, followed very quickly by the real Area 51, which tells the whole story of Wright-Patterson and all of the stories of top secret and alien technology that may have been taken to Wright-Patterson. These are just great books. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. And Mr. Carey, if you're standing by, I'm going to play a bumper out, and I'll be with you in just one moment. So, friends, I'm always happy when there's an audience. I can't tell you how happy I am. Listen, I'm taking this journey, and you guys get to take it with me. And that's the great part of our show here. We get to experience this journey together. I'm glad that I could take you guys with me. I'm glad that we could take this journey together. Just want to mention quickly, there was no shows previous to today because I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. I thank everybody that reached out to me. I'm fairly certain it's not COVID and just a cold, but it has messed with my throat and I was losing my voice. I'm feeling a little bit better. So thanks, everyone. Until next time, friends, my name is Stephen Cambion, still searching for the truth about this Roswell event. Good night, and God bless all of you. Good night, friends.